So you want to stop procrastinating so that the next time you have an essay due in 4 weeks at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, you don't spend the first 3 weeks and 6 days doing nothing and only start working on the essay approximately the night before it's due. This is the point where you start Shakespeareing that essay out for the next 10 hours straight. And when you eventually go to submit it online at 7:58 a.m., your internet decides it suddenly hates you, and 3 minutes later you were too late in submitting your essay and get an automatic 0, while all you can think is that the past 10 hours have been for nothing and that you wanted to cease into a black hole from the intense sleep deprivation you're feeling right now. This is what we call bad life decisions, or procrastination. People procrastinate on all sorts of things: studying, working, exercising, cleaning, feeding your children. But why do we procrastinate in the first place? Many people will attribute procrastination to laziness, but there's usually a deeper issue here, which can be things like depression, fear of failure, anxiety, perfectionism, or being overwhelmed. Identifying why you procrastinate in the first place is essential to finding a solution that directly addresses your specific issue. For many people, the hardest part of getting a task done is not always the task itself, but actually the process of just starting it. One simple way to get over this is by following the 5-minute rule, which is where you convince yourself to do something for just 5 minutes. And once those 5 minutes are up, you're free to do whatever you like, whether that's scrolling endlessly on YouTube Shorts for the next 5 hours or destroying an 8-year-old on Call of Duty until they cry. But the really interesting thing here is that you find that you rarely ever stop after just 5 minutes, because after getting over that initial hurdle of starting, you've already lowered the friction to doing and then finishing that task. But if there's something specific in that list of tasks that you have to get done that you really don't want to do at all and would prefer to avoid, what you want to do is a strategy called eating the frog. Yes, Mark Twain said if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. In other words, you should start off by doing the task that you're currently dreading the most, because once you've done that, everything else will seem remarkably easier to get through, and you won't have the thought in the back of your mind that after you finish your calculus assignment that you have to down a whole frog. But what if you don't even know what you have to do in the first place? Being overwhelmed when not knowing where to start is an easy way to quickly diverting back to that endless scroll. This is where chunking comes in. Chunking is where you break down a task into smaller and more manageable parts, or chunks, which makes them seem more clear and less daunting. Once you have these chunks, you then put them into a to-do list, or if you're a real try-hard, you can give each task in this list a priority, maybe based on urgency or difficulty, so there is an order to how you approach these tasks and you don't need to worry about which one you should do next. This gives you a plan of action, because without a plan, you don't know where to start, and if you don't know where to start, then watering your plans for the next 2.5 hours is going to seem a lot easier. Using a to-do list also has the added benefit of priming your brain for that dopamine hit, which is just the chemical in your brain that makes you happy, because each time you complete a task and physically tick it off your list, your brain is going to release some dopamine, which will keep you motivated and keeps you completing more tasks, which will release even more dopamine, and the cycle will turn you into a productivity machine. But procrastination can also come as the result of choosing to do the most pleasant thing in the moment, even if that would lead you to feeling worse or even being to your detriment later on. In psychology, this is the idea of short-term gratification versus delayed gratification. Or in other words, it's choosing between doing what gives you the most pleasure in the moment and what is most beneficial in the long term. Typically, you want to gravitate more towards delayed gratification, but it can be really hard to hold yourself back from wasting hours watching Netflix while devouring an entire pack of Doritos when you know that going to the gym is what's healthier for you in the long term. But because getting a six-pack takes a longer time and the reward of exercising consistently every day won't come until weeks or months in the future, you are more likely to eat that pack of Doritos because of the immediate dopamine you get. One of the easiest ways to combat this is by changing your environment to take away those low-effort activities that are immediately gratifying, which you could do by locking away that bag of Doritos, your phone, TV, or anything else in a drawer or somewhere that's not easily accessible. Essentially, you want to leave yourself in a state of extreme boredom so that the things you were initially procrastinating on now seem relatively fun in comparison. The goal here is to get to the point where even taking out the trash or vacuuming will seem more appealing. But if you really want to lean into the fun aspect, gamifying your work is another strategy. This can be through having a leaderboard with your friends on how many hours you studied, having rewards for doing a task, or even doing a speedrun of vacuuming the entire house under 5 seconds. This can work because you don't really ever procrastinate on things that you find fun, like watching Netflix or drinking 5 beers in 1 hour. Another thing you can use is a commitment device, which is just something that forces you into a plan of action regardless of how you feel. A couple hundred years ago, a French bloke called Victor Hugo was writing a book. A year earlier, he had promised his publisher that he would finish the manuscript, but instead of writing it, he spent the entire year writing plays, hosting dinner parties, frolicking around Paris, basically anything that wasn't finishing this manuscript. But with his publisher practically breathing down his neck and the deadline quickly approaching, in a last-ditch effort, he stripped himself down to his undergarments with only a shawl to preserve his modesty and locked the rest of his clothes in a trunk. He had a servant take the trunk from his apartment so he could no longer leave the house without risking being accused of public indecency, and made the servant swear not to return with his clothes until the manuscript was finished. After a few months, he ended up finishing the manuscript a few weeks before the deadline. This was the manuscript for The Hunchback of Notre Dame. While self-imposed house arrest is one option you could take, some less extreme commitment devices could be scheduling a workout with a friend, which is an example of a social commitment. Or maybe giving your friend $100 and telling them only to give it back to you once you finish your assignment by the end of the week, which is a financial commitment. But there's one force that is capable of getting even the most experienced procrastinators to do their work, and that's a deadline. Because even if you don't write that essay for 3 weeks, weeks, once the deadline is within a day, you will practically be abusing your keyboard with how quickly you can get that essay done. That's why you should use an artificial deadline, which is where you set a deadline for when you want something to be done yourself. And this can artificially induce the same feelings of urgency and panic you get when your teacher reminds you the homework that you didn't know was assigned was due that afternoon. If you want some added pressure, you can create accountability by sharing your deadline with a friend, coworker, or child, because that social pressure of appearing incompetent and a failure is enough for most people to get something done. But if all else fails and you really can't bring yourself to get off your phone and start working, simply take your phone, shut it off, and throw it against the wall. Or just onto your bed if you still need to use it afterwards. Anyway, I am collecting donations in the form of subscribes to fund the next video, but for now, stop procrastinating on YouTube, go touch some grass because it's not going to hurt you, and thank you!